I'll call this meeting to order, and as we like to do some introductions, because there's always a lot of expertise in the room besides just up here. So we'd like to involve everyone in the room, and as if you've been here before, you know that I like to run these meetings as sort of an interactive meeting. So it's not just for the actual board members to discuss, but if there's something you'd like to add from the audience, by all means, just raise your hand and I'll recognize you. This meeting is being broadcast, though, so not for introductions that we'll do, but if you have a presentation to make or anything, either use the microphone at the podium there, or there's one by the computer as well. So, Stuart, why don't you start by introducing yourself?
Stuart Moss, and I'm Iowa County Commissioner and farmer, actually on Clear Creek.
Yes.
Ben Clark, City of Iowa City.
John Lindell, City of Coralville.
John Gehring, Iowa County Board of Supervisors.
Jody Bailey, Johnson County Soil and Water Conservation District.
Tracy Mulcahy, City of North Liberty.
Casey Hutchinson, Johnson County Planning.
John Rathman, Clear Creek Watershed Project Coordinator.
Jennifer Fensel, East Central Iowa Council of Governments.
Welcome.
Carol Teeter, Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, Cedar Rapids Office. Emily Martin, Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, Des Moines Office.
Okay.
Cristina Munoz, Estate Planning.
David La Torre, Estate Plan.
Kate Giannini, Iowa Flood Center.
Marie Rice, Tallgrass Prairie.
Ruben Vine, Center for Evaluation and Assessment.
Ryan Mulcahy, Simpson.
Mike Wolf, City of North Liberty.
Amy Foster, City of Coralville.
Aaron Brooke, Iowa.
Dan Holbrook, City of Coralville.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out tonight.
You should probably mention that Kate abandoned us. I mean, she used to be up here. And
Yeah, that's true. At least she's still with us.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, item number 2 is administrative. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented or amended.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Next, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from October 16th, 19. We have them here.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded to approve the minutes. Any discussion on those? Welcome.
Thank you. Sorry for being late.
That's all right. Glad you made it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved. Okay, moving along to item 3 is the Clear Creek Watershed Planning Process Update, and I will turn it over to Jennifer.
Okay, I'm going to move over there.
It's a little easier.
So the first thing on the agenda is, So the first thing on the agenda is to review the draft plan, and I wish I had a copy of it for you, but I don't. And that's all I want to say about it. But it is coming along very well. It is getting so close, and it's kind of at that point where I'm sick of looking at it, but it also has some places that need fixing. So it's coming. I swear it is. I swear it is. The other thing on the agenda that I wanted to do, I guess with your approval, is to talk about the options and possibilities for funding, financing the Clear Creek Watershed Coalition beyond the Iowa Watershed Approach Grant. And so I've put together a little presentation that hopefully gives you some sense of what other watershed management authorities have done in Iowa and what you might think of or consider. And if you would give me some feedback and input, I'd be happy to come back next time and talk a little bit more about actual numbers. So if that is all right with you, I will, unless you have no intention, and then it probably wouldn't be helpful. But is that okay with everybody? Yep. Okay. So, all right. Make sure I got this. Okay, so by way of example, other watershed management authorities that I'm aware of are some of the options where local funding has happened or just any kind of financing, I guess, is one option. You could continue as a volunteer board. Somebody on the board, an actual representative, would then call the meetings, do the agendas, do the minutes. You'd have to work together to do that and to kind of keep things moving forward. There's another watershed management authority, the Lower Cedar, that actually started out with a pass the hat concept, where they literally just asked their member entities if they'd like to contribute something, and some gave as little as $100 and some gave as much as $5,000. And so that was enough. They had a coordinator, a grant-funded coordinator, but that was enough for them to cobble together some matching funds for a planning grant. You could also do direct contributions. You could use any number of funding formulas. I actually have done one for the Indian Creek Watershed Management Authority, and also for the Middle Cedar Watershed Management Authority. They're working through that right now. There are other WMAs that do a per capita kind of assessment, and then also grant funding. So there are a couple. Obviously, you're an example of that right at the moment, but there are also others. The Indian Creek has a grant for a soil health coordinator, but that's for a given set amount of time, 5 years. So we'll talk a little bit about just the contribution formula. The most important part here is to really determine what your goal is or where you want to end up. Like for the Lower Cedar, they wanted enough seed money to serve as match for a grant. Do you want to budget for, a coordinator, a staff? What are your goals? The other thing that's important to do is to sort of find a way to measure everyone's contribution. I call it their share or their stake in the watershed. The idea there is if you have sort of more at risk in terms of flood damages, or if you have, for example, like source water concerns. There are many reasons why communities and counties coordinate together for watershed management, but it's kind of figuring out what your goals are and then who should contribute and how much. I'm going to go through some of those variables in a minute. You can also talk about using a combination of variables, which I've done, and then weighting those variables, basically just to kind of, again, further refine the stake in the watershed. And once you figure out whether you want to do a formula, then the next step is to remember that this body can come up with that formula and that ending budget, but they can't compel any member to actually contribute. That decision would rest with the policymaking entity, for each member. So like a city council or the board of supervisors. So I thought it might be helpful to go a little bit through what a watershed coordinator, what their responsibilities are typically. There are administrative tasks, and so John and I, on some level work together on these, but handling the meetings, doing member outreach, organization building, grant writing, and then just managing the money. In your case, it's being managed through the lead county and the contract with Johnson County at the moment. It could continue that arrangement, or you could find someone else to do that. There are also that technical assistance kind of things that John is also doing, where he's reaching out, trying to sell practices, fulfilling the deliverables of the grant, and kind of, working on development of projects that could be, that could pursue grant funding in the future. So some of the variables that I have used include population, the total, and that would be population by, within the watershed boundary. There's also, you can use area or acres of the entire watershed, and then how much of each jurisdiction is within the watershed boundary. You can do assessed value of all parcels in the watershed boundary. You can use what's termed the flood hazard area. This is determined by FEMA. So you can say, okay, and the reason that I kind of like this one is it gets at the idea of you have more at risk. You might want to support more of this work. So you can do either area in the flood hazard area or value of those parcels in the flood hazard area. Those are two different ways of measuring. So I've already mentioned Indian Creek WMA a little bit. This is just an example to show their formula. They decided that they would use acres by jurisdiction, and they would weight that 40%. And then they use the value of the parcels in the flood area by jurisdiction, and they weighted that 60%. And then their final budget was $50,000, and so you work backwards through that math and figure out the percentages, and that gives you the contribution amount. So you'll see that Robbins pays $1,709 a year, and Cedar Rapids pays $12,556. Now, I'll go through this here in a little more detail. I don't know how well you probably can't. Well, I guess it's not that bad. This next one's probably going to be harder to read. So they started that funding in fiscal 16, the year their plan was done, the summer of 2015, their plan was done. So the grant funding was over, and so they decided we want at least some assistance with keeping the meetings going, to seek out grant funding for projects. And so you can see there the first few fiscal years, although $50,000 was invoiced out to everyone, the city of Marion decided not to pay in cash. They wanted their contribution to be part of the their stormwater staff as in kind. And so you'll see what the final amount was. And then they partnered with ECOG for the administrative service, and I just billed as I spent time on Indian Creek work. And so you'll see that I billed out $26,500, and then we spent a little bit on an intern to do a specific project. So you'll just see how that money carries forward. And then now, starting in fiscal 19, that was the year we got the Soil Health Coordinator grant. And so we hired a person and started paying them. And so it's just an example of how the money can work. And you can use any final amount, budget amount, and then invoice out. And then this demonstrates a few important things again, which is it's voluntary. And so the city of Marion, their policymakers said no, until you can see that we got the grant. And then they were like, okay, there's going to be a full-time person dedicated to work in the Indian Creek. Yes, now we've got something that we're willing to put our cash in for. So I've mentioned this a couple of times, but this is sort of where we are now with the Soil Health Partnership and the Soil Health Coordinator. Now remember, there's no money for implementation in this project. It is simply for the staff person's expertise and focused effort to go out into the Indian Creek watershed and sell practices and really do conservation planning with landowners and help them through the sort of red tape of accessing cost share. And just in the first 6 months, he had commitments for 1,300 acres of new cover crop acres. He had a field day that was really, really well attended, sites for bioreactors and saturated buffers, and then completed some conservation plans on another. And so you'll see those deliverables and sort of where we are. I think it's a really interesting and strong statement, or strong verification of my view of all of this kind of from afar, which is people matter. It's the people, and you don't necessarily need the implementation dollars, but you do need people to help push that through. So another example would be a partnership between the Middle Cedar WMA and the Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance. They are a group that I think are represented by some agribusiness and some commodity groups. And they have kind of this organization where they've got some grant funding. They also have some private funding. And they approached the Middle Cedar WMA, and they wanted to work with them to provide, again, along these same lines, to pay for the expertise and the technical assistance, a person. And so we went out and did a procurement and 2-year contract with North Iowa Agronomy Partners for outreach and technical assistance. And so this is interesting because the way they get paid sort of a flat amount for the outreach that we expect them to do, but then they also get this incentive-based reimbursement for the cost share applications that they assist landowners in filling out and moving forward with. It's kind of a way to incentivize those practices without actually implementation money, but to get your agronomists out there kind of doing the selling for you for practices. So I tell you those examples and kind of run through those just to give you the background for where these budget potential, these are just potential, kind of to spur discussion, potential budget final options would be. The Indian Creek model, where they partner with us for administrative support, we have a final budget of $50,000. I think $40,000 would do, because you can see we have a little bit of carryover, but it is helpful to have that for grant match. You could also go the route of having that administrative support via someone and then contract out for technical services. And so that $90,000 final annual budget amount would cover something similar to what Middle Cedar is doing with Iowa Ag Water Alliance. You could hire a traditional full-time coordinator to take care of all of those functions for about $110,000. And I'm basing that on both the IAWA and also costs, and then the soil health coordinator. And then you could also go the route of having administrative support and a full-time coordinator. And one thing I'll say about that is that a lot of times it's hard to find in one person that technical support who's good going out and selling practices, but also is good on that sort of paperwork end and grant writing end. That's just been my observation. There might well be a miracle person who has that, but I think in many cases I would be terrible selling practices, but I'm pretty good at the administrative part. So just as an example. Okay, so that's kind of my run through of just what I have seen and what examples I know are out there. There are others. Polk County Public Works actually employs someone, and they have they've kind of centralized it in Polk County because Polk County participates in many WMAs in the Des Moines metro area, and they decided they would ask for contributions from all of those who cooperate in those different WMAs, and then have one staff person who then serves or helps each of those WMAs. So that's another way to go. I don't know that I necessarily need you to decide for sure, but it would be good if you would maybe could give me some direction in terms of what outcome do you want, kind of what scenarios would you like to see to compare? Do you have an idea or a strong feeling toward what variables, like, you know, do you like the idea of flood hazard area to kind of measure stake, or do you like the idea of based just on population? Or I can tell you that population and value is going to skew money toward the urban areas. Area is going to skew more to the counties. And then you've got the issue of SWCDs and whether or not you want to ask them to contribute cash or not. One good thing you have going for you, unlike the Middle Cedar, is you don't have sort of a leftover amount of the member entities who are eligible but don't participate in the WMA. In this case, in this watershed, all of you represent every eligible entity. So you don't have that sort of hole at the end. And so I guess, do you have any questions? Do you want to pitch any sort of, hey, could you tell me what the numbers would be if this and this and this were true? Or we can continue the conversation in April too.
Well, I'll start. And
Okay.
Others can. I guess I need more information on where we're at with the current timeline under our current, like when are we going to expire? And
Yeah.
and I'd like to see it's been a long time since I've seen our budget, and I would like to see where we started, where we're at now, and how much further do we have left to go.
So the grant funding for the coordinator position will expire at the latest December of 2021. And so that would put you at wanting at least partially to have funding in the budget, in your own budgets for fiscal '22. And you're doing fiscal '21 right now, I assume, so you've got about a year to. But as we were talking about earlier, at 4 meetings a year, it goes so fast, and it feels like we don't, talk in between. So any thought about it now, I think it's at least good to get the picture. There, once the grant is over, the grant's over. So there's nothing left. I mean, there won't be anything left to spend. If we don't spend it, it goes back. So
Could we see all of the potential proposals with
money,
a variety
with dollars.
with a variety of different scenarios, just
Sure.
so we can see how it shakes out? Because it's hard.
I know.
Looking at 110,000 to just see how much is this going to be
Right.
for North Liberty or Coralville or
Right.
anyone else at the table. So I think it
And-
would be helpful in April to have that, maybe.
And I would be happy to do that. I just wanted to get a sense for if you really wanted to have this conversation before, because it's a lot of math.
But it's,
So-
now is the time
Now
to
is
do
the
it.
time.
Because it is this time next year.
Yes.
We should have it finalized.
figured
in-
out.
In people's budgets.
Yep.
So,
So you want the full-time coordinator for sure. Do you want to see the scenario for all of them? And just
I
see
would
how
think
it
so.
shakes out? Okay.
I would think so, unless someone else has strong opinions another way.
I was just gonna say, that's a lot of formulas. I didn't know if maybe.
I've got it set
It's
up.
plug and
As
chug,
long as I
right?
have your percentage, your data. I just need to get with Rick and get data.
Okay.
And then it won't be terrible to do that. It would be helpful and less overwhelming for you if you have thoughts on area, value, population, or do you just want to see all of it?
I personally don't have any idea how that's going to shake out.
Well,
So
I'll
I
tell
don't
you
know.
again, both times I've run a lot of numbers, I think, probably from a fairness standpoint, that combining either population or area with, no, I'm sorry, population or value with an area measure, because those will skew urban county. So that kind of, if you do combine those, it balances it out, if that makes sense. Because, you might imagine population is going to really, really heavily go toward your urban. So Iowa City, Iowa City doesn't have very much, but Coralville, Tiffin, and North Liberty are going to.
We don't have very much area either.
Yeah, and you might not.
So, but I mean, I just don't know.
Exactly, because you don't know until you see the actual numbers. So yes, I can definitely do that. And if it's okay, I will do that weighting. I mean, I'll just give you like I'll just go 50-50 and sort of match them up. And then you can decide, like, I hate that.
Well, you've done this before and have the expertise, so I would
Okay, is that
love for
okay?
that to happen,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, you can help us wade
Right.
through it, so.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can definitely do that. Let's just back up and look at yeah. So population, so for example, the Middle Cedar asked to see, after I showed them a lot of numbers, and I thought, oh my gosh, they're gonna freak out with all these numbers. But after I showed them all of it, they said, we wanna see population and then value, area in the flood hazard. Those were the two they picked. Indian Creek picked total area, acres, and value in the flood hazard. So you can kind of see how you're pairing those two things up. You would not want to do like area and then also area in the floodplain, or area and then Yeah, I guess those would be the only two, but, or like only pick value and population, that would also not work out very well. I mean, you could do it, but
It's gonna skew
it's
it.
going to skew it pretty heavily one direction, so. Okay, well, I appreciate that. I think that helps me. You want to see numbers, you're open to that, and you want to see scenarios, which we can do.
And I think I think we all will need at this too, besides the numbers, sort of
Like
a listing of accomplishments and
Or like-
deliverables and.
Yeah,
I mean,
tasks.
Maybe it's just my aging mind, but, you know, if I had to defend it in front of my council,
Yeah.
you know, in the next hour, I'd be
Yeah.
hard pressed to remember everything that we've
Yep.
done and what our
Yes.
achievements are, and we're not gonna refund it if we don't have, you know, achievements and.
Right.
you
What are we
know.
getting for our buck?
Right.
But yeah,
And-
absolutely.
Budgets get tighter and tighter, and demands grow and grow. So being able to justify is truly important.
It is. It is. Okay, we can definitely do that. That helps. And do you have any questions on anything else then? Or,
Can, tell us about the status of the plan
So
that you.
so that, well, I could actually like page
Just
through
tell
it
us,
really
that's all.
quick,
Yeah.
but it's so close. And there's a couple of places that need a little additional information. It needs a little bit of smoothing out. And then my plan is to get it out to you to review. And it's like gonna be 200 pages, so you're not gonna wanna look at the whole thing. The presentation I did for you last time kind of captures the highlights, but I think I'd like to do another one that talks more about what the implementation steps will be next time. And then after that, I'd like to schedule an open house or two for people to come and learn more about the plan before your entities are asked to adopt it. And so you can help me figure out how best you think that might
Okay.
work. And so I think I'm not going to say time anymore, because every time I say time, it doesn't work out very well. But it is so close. In fact, I just had a meeting today with the design, like to get the template looking good. And we're on the same track in terms of timing. So I don't want to say time, but it's very close. It's very,
Okay.
very close. And I'm really happy with it. It's turned out a lot better than I thought a couple months ago. So
Good, okay.
that's good.
Anything else for Jennifer? Okay, moving on. John is going to give us an update on some of the practice implementation.
All right, so this is the packet that's stapled together in the wrong corner. I am not a master of our copy machine. All right, can we see that? Okay, we can see most of it. So, I called this bid package 3 before I found out what our actual bid packages are going to be. So this will be environmental review package 3 for those keeping score. This package includes 6 different structures, 5 of which are ponds, and 1 of which is a basin, which in urban terms would be kind of like a berm between a couple of valleys that holds water back for a short period of time, usually 24 hours, a little bit more sometimes. These are between Highway 6 and the northern edge of the watershed, north and a little bit east of Oxford. Okay. So the first one, which is in near the northernmost part, it's the second green dot south of the northern border, if that makes sense. And this is a pond that is 3.8 acres once it's completed. And that will be completely fenced with 2 accesses for livestock watering. This is currently a pasture. Will be a real nice addition to the watershed. It's very near the top of the watershed. The next one is in the same pasture, up closer to the road, and this one is just short of 1.3 acres. That one is not going to be fully fenced, just the structure itself is going to be fenced to keep cattle off of the structure so it stays together longer. And this is actually going to address a lot of soil that comes from the lot to the east of this property and has brought a lot of soil down through there. And this one is on just north of Highway 6, and the next 4 are all in the same pasture area. And it turns out that these 2 landowners are brothers. This one's a pond which is about 1.5 acres. He's changed his mind. He does want to fence the whole pond off and have a couple of, probably 1 livestock entrance to this one. When this was drawn up, it was just fencing the structure. Then the next one is a little bit to the east, and that one is a little bit over 0.8 of an acre. Again, that whole thing will be fenced off with 1 area for cattle to get down to the water in the wintertime and summertime. I think he's going to have an auxiliary watering line that goes down underneath the dam for possible use down below the dam as well. And this is that basin. This one's kind of long and runs along a fence line, and it encompasses 3 or 4 different valleys. The landowner has problems with water coming down this hill and rushing across the field to the stream that's to the east there. Can you see my pointer?
Yeah, we can.
Oh, get out. All right, so, and then the last one is a pond that is right next to Highway 6. And again, this one's going to be fenced completely. And this one is just above 0.7 of an acre. So all totaled, these 5 structures, I think, will do a really nice job in a part of the watershed where I think we saw last time on a map where we need 6 or so ponds, and we got 5 of them here, and we've got a couple others that are getting done by other landowners. So that was a red area in our sub-watershed area, and this will take care of that situation up there. So these have gone through the environmental review process, which this one actually didn't take very long, only I think a couple of months. And next Wednesday, I'm going to be presenting it to the Board of Supervisors for their approval to move forward. And I think this will be in the second bid package. Our first one, we're right on the cusp of, maybe in the next week or so, we'll have a date for when we're going to let the bid. And the first one has a total of 9 practices, 3 of which are grade stabilization structures. We covered that at the last meeting. I know it was 3 months ago. But if you want, I can send you that package that we went through. Any questions?
Well, I'm a city boy, so
Yes.
Doesn't mean a lot to me as much as maybe Stuart probably, but what do you think, Stuart? Does this?
Yeah, they look, I wish we had more in Iowa County.
Yeah.
I've got to talk to you afterwards about some.
Yeah, we don't have any ponds in Iowa County set up at this time, but we've got a number of basins and waterways that we're looking at.
Do the ponds have more priority than basins?
Ponds and basins in our original ranking rank the same.
They do.
Yeah. Ponds, of course, will hold more water in their temporary storage. So what the Middle Cedar, coordinator worked up some calculations, and he heavily weights ponds and
So
wetlands.
Are most of these in agricultural tillage, not necessarily but row crop areas, or some of these just kind of both just
All of these are
Just-
pasture.
just pasture?
Yeah, but the ones in Iowa County are all in row crop
Row
fields.
crop. I see.
We have a lot more pasture land in the middle sub-watershed of Clear Creek, which is mostly Johnson County, a little bit of Iowa County.
Right, okay. No, they look good.
Is it unusual that they're all the same family name?
Yes.
Well, Joel was coming to the meetings in the beginning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a supporter of the
Yeah,
program.
he's been here, I think he was at the first several.
Okay, good.
I yell at him when he doesn't show up, so.
Good for you. And that-
Anything else? We have to approve this, do we, John?
I don't think so.
Okay.
This is informational.
It says review and approval on the agenda, that's why I asked, so.
Well, maybe we do need to approve it.
We'll make a
Let's
motion.
approve it.
I make a motion, we approve it.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve what John just presented. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it is approved. Item 2 is Iowa Economic Development Authority report and funding request.
Okay, and I do not have a presentation for this because it's mostly paperwork. The upside of it is we've got a tremendous amount of interest, and at this point we've got more interest and more projects than we can fund. But the Iowa Economic Development Authority is looking at redistributing the funding because we have a number of watersheds that have a real high interest, and we've got some with not so much interest. So they're looking to see if they can take some from the lower interest areas and move that money into the higher interest areas so that we can spend it all. And I'm working on putting together that request form, which includes a spreadsheet with all of the different practices and all of the concept practices that are kind of new to being in the program or hoping to get in the program. And also we'll list out the contracted monies that we have that haven't been spent yet, so they can look at the total that we have initially, the amount that we are obligated to spend, and then what the total of all the practices are going to be. And if everything works out the way I'd like to see it, we'll get another few $1 million, and we'll easily be able to spend that. It's interesting because there's only 77 practices, but they amount to over $3 million all total. That includes engineering, which is way more expensive than I expected. But that's okay. It's a needed deal, and the thing about the engineering is it's a front-loaded deal. You know, you can't put anything in the ground before it gets engineered. So a lot of the projects we have engineered already or are nearly completed that way. So I'll be taking that presentation to the Board of Supervisors next Wednesday. So I plan on having all my ducks in a row tomorrow afternoon because I need to get that information to them before close of business Thursday. And I'll present the same thing that I presented to them to you guys at the next meeting so that you can see the numbers and how that all works out. And hopefully I'll have good news that we got the money. And then the last thing on my part was we have one application for assistance that needs approval, and this is a gentleman in Iowa County that his projects are adjacent to another project, so they would go hand in hand. His is one basin and one grade stabilization structure. Basin being kind of a smaller version, grade stabilization structure being more like what we think of as a dry pond or a detention basin, urban-wise.
I'll make a motion, we accept it.
Motion made
Second.
and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Very good.
That's all my excitement.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your written update as well. Okay, item 5 is the Iowa Watershed Approach Partner Updates from the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. Emily and her colleague maybe are going to present. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Emily Martin, the Conservation Programs Coordinator for Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. My role at INHF is largely writing grants and carrying out our grant programs as we receive funding. A lot of what I focus on is water quality and quantity issues across the state of Iowa, as well as climate action and climate resiliency. Just before I get started, thinking about the term climate change or climate action or whatever you want to call it, it can be divisive depending on what you believe or what you think. So I want to make sure that we focus on climate resilience today and what I'm talking about, which is a new tool and flooding and how it's impacting the state of Iowa. So to give a little bit of context to this tool that I'm talking about and to introduce you to INHF if you don't know us. So in 2019, we received a grant from the Land Trust Alliance to look at this new tool from the Nature Conservancy called the Resilient Land Mapping Tool and to see how the state of Iowa might explore using it. And so that's what I did in 2019. And I actually talked about it last October with both John and Jennifer. They listened to me for an hour, go very in depth on it. I only have 15 minutes today, so I'll hit the highlights. So Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation was founded in 1979. We are a nonprofit land trust, and we were founded to assist public agencies in acquiring land quickly. I think most of you know us, but since 1979, we have protected 176,000 acres, over 1,500 projects in 96 counties across the state of Iowa. And since then, we've also branched out into other areas. We work on trails. We do public policy. I don't know if any of you listened to Governor Kim Reynolds' Condition of the State address yesterday, where she talked about the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund and that she wants it funded this year, which is very exciting for all of us.
It hasn't happened yet.
So we also own and manage our own land long term, and that's something we're doing increasingly as we go farther into our work and our mission. And something that we're doing is focusing on climate action and thinking, what role does it play in our mission? We do conservation, and it's something we all have to think about, and something that we're thinking about as we go through our next 5 years of strategic planning. And that's been my role, thinking about things like how is carbon being stored on the land, how do prairies play a role, can there be carbon markets, things like that. So when we think about what our changing climate might be doing to Iowa and what it has been doing to Iowa and what the future is bringing, we know that we've lost $18 billion due to flooding since 1988, and those are numbers from University of Iowa. And that is just residential cost, business cost, and farming costs. That's not including infrastructure and the cost to cities. We know that there is increased frequency of precipitation extremes. So when we get rainfall, it's typically falling in greater quantities in shorter amounts of time. So we've seen rainfall events in the past few years that are up to 10 inches within just a few hours, where we used to receive maybe an inch over the course of a day. We're seeing that increase, but then we're also seeing those events get farther apart. So we're seeing increasing drought periods between those intense rainfalls, which is leading to increasing flood events. As I'm sure you know, we're seeing more flooding, which leads to soil runoff and soil loss. It's also increasing our need to protect floodplains. And you can see this map here is from 2018. I don't know if any of you've heard from landowners or farmers that it's just been extremely difficult in the past 2 years due to wet conditions. I know that's a common complaint I've heard, and it's been a struggle for everybody. So when we think about our changing climate, we can think about it in two ways. We can think about what's causing it, and we can think about the impacts that we're feeling. And we're already doing the work to combat the impacts, and we're already doing the work to combat the things that are causing climate change in Iowa. And that's by putting in conservation practices. That's by planting prairie, savanna, forests. That's by taking care of our floodplains. The things that we're talking about tonight, that's already doing the work. It's what we call natural climate solutions, and that has the potential to reduce 37% of our carbon dioxide emissions, to mitigate that in America, just by protecting the land by 2030. It may be a lofty goal, but we can do it if we think about it in terms of natural climate solutions or just land protection. So this is the tool. This is the Nature Conservancy's Resilient Land Mapping tool. There's the URL there. I'll have it at the end of the presentation. You can go and you can play around with this yourself. It covers a large portion of North America, and luckily Iowa too. It seems like sometimes we get left out of cool things like this, but we're in it. It's based on a paper that was published, I believe, in 2017. I have a clip out of here. You can see the title. And it was published by a few scientists there. And what they were looking at is how climate resiliency can play a role in conservation, and how should it play a role? How do you begin to look at that on a countrywide scale? How do you map it? How do you make it accessible to everybody? And so the way they define, and I'll have some definitions on the next slide too if you want to read them, but the way they define resiliency, because I think more people are using the term resiliency now, what they mean it to be is that it's land that will sustain native plants, animals, and natural processes into the future, thinking long-term, but beyond our generation into future generations as we're thinking about climate. And so these are three key definitions. They're thinking about resilient sites, which is what I'll talk about more here. That's land that has the ability to carry forward those natural processes. That's the land that is best suited to hold that. They'll give a resilience score, which is the color on the map from this previous, and you'll see up closer. And then they also talk about local connectedness, or the idea of climate corridors. So as we're thinking about plants and animals that may be moving, let's say, to increasing temperatures, they want to move farther north because they want it to be 80 degrees and they won't survive otherwise. They need to be able to have land that could connect them all the way up to where they want to be. And if that's not there, then they have nowhere to go and they'll go extinct. So that's the idea of local connectedness. And so their tool is heavily based on topography. If we're thinking about how things naturally move, if you think about, let's say, like a sunflower that wants to live at the bottom of a hill because it likes well-drained, semi-well-drained soils and 80-degree temperatures, but let's say temperatures increase 1 degree and suddenly we have wetter soils, it's going to want to move up a hill. But if we built a mega highway on that hill, it has nowhere to go. So we need to be thinking about these things as we're deciding what land to protect, and where we're putting prairies and forests and things like that. So we aren't the first state to look at using this. Other states around us have already started using this tool. This is an example from Minnesota that the Nature Conservancy gave, that they are using this tool to complement other data sets that they already have. So in this case, they're talking about biodiversity and how this goes with that this tool isn't meant to be the sole answer or the sole priority of anything. I don't think we need more priorities just dumped onto what we're already doing. We want it to complement what we're doing. So they used it to identify new areas and make better land management decisions, and it's a way to focus in on land that maybe it'll help mitigate flooding best. It'll also have the climate resiliency. It has a rare species on it, and you start to stack these things, and this should just fit right into that. So this is what the state of Iowa looks like. You can see a lot of yellow, which means that it's average. The brown means below average, which you can see a lot of as well. You can see a few parts that are green, and those are typically following our river corridors, if you can notice. And that's because Iowa is a pretty flat state, and most of our topography follows our rivers. It makes sense, it follows. You can see some out in the Les Hills. And that's maybe one weakness of this tool, which is why it's meant to complement other tools that we already have. But it gives us a chance to think about how climate and flooding are intrinsically linked, and how resiliency and flooding and climate and all these things can go together. And we're already working on it, and we can put a name to it, and we can define it. So I have a list here of how we could be using the mapping tool and how I've been applying it so far. And I can give you an example, and I will go through some maps here for Clear Creek, the same example that I gave to John, and just show you how I'm thinking about it. So you could think big. You could come up with new programs. Maybe we should have climate resiliency groups. Maybe that's an idea. If you want to think a little bit more realistically, it could open up new opportunities for new partnerships. Maybe people you hadn't previously considered thinking about talking to, you look on the map and now you can see, hey, they have really climate resilient land within our watershed, and we never thought to talk to them before, and now we have a reason to. We've talked a lot about funding tonight. It could help focus that funding on the highest impact projects. I know John sent me the ranking sheet for projects, and it goes by a point system. This could fit in there, whatever amount of points you want to assign. It's far above average resilience. It counts for 3 points, and the project score is a little higher. That's just one idea. It could provide more justification for funding requests. I know a lot of the larger foundations, like nationwide, they're focusing on climate action as well. It's on their minds, it's what they want to be funding, and this is sort of your foot in the door because you're already doing the work, but this, like I said, gives you a name to what you're doing and to help justify that ask. It can help narrow outreach to landowners. Just with limited resources, I know a lot of watershed groups struggle with limited funding, limited resources, limited personnel, so this is a way to help narrow where attention should be given. And it also helps communicate specifically about what you're doing, both for flooding and for climate, and to have a different communication style and to be able to start quantifying the impact that your work is having beyond just flood protection and water quality protection. So this is Clear Creek. This is what it looks like with a resilience score laid over top of it. So you can see the dark green is the far above average, and it goes down to the dark brown, which is far below average, yellow being average. You can see there's a lot of developed land off there to the east, which comes in gray. And you can see there's a good chunk of land that is in that dark green, which is the far above average resilience, a good chunk in the lighter green, but a lot of it is around the average amount, which isn't surprising. And I did look at Indian Creek Watershed too. And it was very similar. It's just every watershed is going to have its different strengths and different things to look at, and this helps. It's a unique way to look at it. So I did a little bit of math here, and I made a graph just to show how many acres are in that above average resilience. So there's about 20,000 acres, or about 30% of the watershed. So if you look at it that way, maybe you've just eliminated 70% of the watershed from, we'll look at it when we have a future grant, and this time we're focusing on that 30%, or however you want to allocate your resources. So the idea with the Land Trust Alliance funding was not to just look at this tool, but then to see how it starts pairing with our local priorities. And I have just a handful here. This map can get very overwhelming. I'm sure you're all looking at it like, oh my gosh, like there's a lot going on here. And that's where when I'm done today, I want to pass it off to you guys to think about adding your own local priorities, because I know there's so much that I could add here. I have bird conservation areas, which is up to the north there, public land, some NRCS easements, but beyond that, I know there's so many maps that you could overlay with this and start thinking about soil erosion. You could start thinking about saturated buffers and where they're ideal and start seeing if they overlap. And so now I've added in the 2-year floodplain from the Iowa Flood Center, because that's another thing to think about. It's another priority to be protecting. And we can see that we start to see some trends here. We start to see some maybe natural corridors forming that are both in the floodplain, they're in the high climate resilience corridor, and they might be connecting to public land that's just outside of the watershed boundary. So just as an example of how I thought through this is I see these areas here. We have 3 in a row with high climate resiliency and are in the 2-year floodplain. So if we zoom in and look, now maybe we've just narrowed it down to a few acres that are fitting that 2-year floodplain boundary, the climate resiliency far above average. It's connecting to public land. Maybe there's if somebody knows this watershed better than me, maybe there's a town nearby, or you know somebody and it's like, hey, we could connect up there, we could be creating a corridor, and we know there's already momentum in that area. And just to show you how the topography does play a role in this, I overlaid the same map onto LiDAR. And if I flip back and forth very quickly, you can see that topography isn't everything to this tool, but it certainly plays a large role. That just because there's high topography doesn't mean it's climate resilient. There has to be the other factors that went into this tool. And if you're curious about that, I could talk about it with you one-on-one, or you can read that paper. I can send it to you. So thinking about next steps, like I said, add your own priorities. Anybody can play around with this tool. You can download the data. You can upload your own shapefiles onto their website, and you can look at it that way. Thinking about the future, the long-term future. There's not a carbon market right now for the state of Iowa, but there could be, and it gives you another reason to talk to new partners like your local utilities. I know other states, such as South Carolina, have been able to successfully talk to their utilities and think about carbon markets or even water quality credits, nutrient credits, and be able to get funding for conservation that way. And tools like this start to play into that, and it's important as a first stepping stone. You're thinking about the future, we need to know more about carbon storage. That's why we're starting to sample on our own properties in order for these things to work and to be able to quantify it. And as I mentioned before, it helps you communicate your work in both quantity and quality, being able to point to this map and think about climate. I also want to know what you want to see from the tool, what your ideas are. There's a lot you could do with it. I think that has a lot of potential. It could be another priority. If you have any questions for me, I want to leave you with my contact information. If you do have any questions, like I said, 15 minutes is not a lot of time to cover something that is a very cool and complicated tool. I also want to point out that Carol Teeter's here, our Eastern Iowa Program Manager, and there's her contact information if you'd like to get in touch with her. Otherwise, thank you for inviting me here to speak to you. Let me know if you have any questions.
Questions for Emily? So if we went to that website there, the tool is actually accessible?
Yes, to everybody. And I think it's very intuitive to use as well.
Oh, that's cool. Seems like a great resource.
Thank you, everybody. Do you have a question?
Can I put this slideshow on our website?
Yes.
It'd be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're down to item 6, which is announcements and events. We have the Iowa Water Conference coming up in Ames on April 8th and 9th. Anybody want to say anything more about that?
It's a good event.
It's a good event.
It is. You can learn a lot.
Any other announcements from audience or board members?
When's the big splash?
For Hampshire? Oh.
Kate's got it.
Oh.
Sure. Kate Giannini, Iowa Flood Center. So thanks, John, for bringing that up. So the big splash will be in August, I think August 14th through the 17th. It'll be a huge celebration on the Iowa River. Hampshire is involved, so there has been a large budget around there. There will be tight roping across the river. There will be a float parade down the river. There will be flying Walendas. There's going to be a STEM festival along with it. So they're expecting about 20,000 people to come in. I don't know if that's the number that they're hitting. So, and along with that, there will also be the International Flood Management Conference. It'll be here on campus. Pretty amazing. Most of the times, I think it's the first time it's been in the United States. I think previously it's been in the UK, and it only happens twice a year. So feel free to check that out as well on the IIHR website. Another conference to highlight is the International Soil and Water Conservation Society is celebrating their 75th year, and they are having their conference in Des Moines this year, which is a big deal as well. So that will be July 26th through 29th. You may have remembered Claire Lindahl. She used to be the executive director with the Conservation Districts of Iowa, and now she's director at the Soil and Water Conservation Society. So that should be a good one as well. And League of Cities. is hosted.
Yes, the third week of September. I don't have the exact dates without looking at my calendar, but the Iowa League of Cities Conference will be here, hosted at the Coralville Marriott this year, so we welcome you all for that. I'll mention too that the this year's annual Okoboji Blue Water Festival that I've had the pleasure of speaking at the last couple of years is August 8th. It's a public awareness day. It's a Saturday celebrating the water quality and raising issues of the Iowa Great Lakes area. And that conference always ends with a free concert. And they just announced today that the featured act for this year is they're bringing back Boz Skaggs. He was at the conference like 3 years ago, and he was fantastic. So
Down two, then left.
yeah, there you go. Any other announcements? Okay, public comments. Anything that we haven't covered? Okay. Our next meeting will be April 15th. On your way to paying your taxes, you can come here at 5 o'clock, please, and be at this same location. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And seconded? Second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, everybody.